every morning, be the calm I feel, be the beauty I behold, all the days I'm here, be here to remind me of all the goodness I have known, be the heart that holds on tight, don't let me let it go.
Well, good morning, everybody. So glad that you have chosen to join us for week 2 of our current series, where we have been asking the question, who needs God? Now, I love the video that Miguel created for us as we start thinking about this question together. And I talked to you last week about specifically the visual side of that video. In fact, last week I told you the reason that Miguel scratched everybody's eyes out is because he's a serial killer in the making, and you should all be aware of that. Not really. No, he is not. He's a great guy. You need to get to know Miguel. The reason he scratched everybody's eyes out is because it's symbolic of the fact that there are a lot of people, maybe even a growing number of people in our world today, who either can't see their need for God or they simply don't see a need for God, right? There are a lot of people in the world today who would tell you that life for them is so good that they really can't see how God could add any value to their life at all. In fact, these people may never verbalize it, but this group of people in our society, they might even feel like, man, to spend time with God would kind of feel like a waste of time because I really don't see how he could add any real value to my life. There are other people, though. It's not an issue of can't, it's an issue of don't. Maybe they've embraced a belief system or a philosophy or a worldview where they simply don't see a need for God. There are other people who life for them has not gone the way they wanted, so they experience disappointment. They pray prayers and they feel like God didn't answer their prayers. They go through some heartbreak in their life and they think to themselves, man, if that's who God is, if that's the way God treats people who love him, then I don't want anything to do with him. And for whatever reason, there's this growing number of people in our world today who either can't or they don't see a need for God. Now, that's just the visual side of the title video. You also want to pay attention in the weeks ahead to the lyrical side of the video because I think that Miguel chose the perfect song when he chose this particular song. The song says, and I hope you paid attention to it, he says, be here in the morning, be the calm I feel, be the beauty I behold all the days I'm here. Be here to remind me of all the goodness I have known. Be the heart that holds on tight. Don't let me let it go. Now, I don't know if the guy is singing about a girl in his life or if he's actually singing about God, but I really do believe that that's the way in which a lot of people feel about God today. There is this sense in which we know that we need God's calming presence in our lives. Life is hectic. Life is full of problems. Lots of people feel anxious, that they feel a little bit panicky. And because of that, we just instinctively know, man, I need God's calming presence in my life. There's this sense in which we know that we need the beauty and the goodness that God brings into our world. But there's also this sense in which we know that we need him to hold on to us, because for whatever reason, we may not hold on to him. And that right there is the issue that we're addressing in this series. There is a growing number of people in our world today who, for whatever reason, they can't figure out whether or not they even need God in their life anymore. And so when surveys are being conducted throughout this country by groups like The Barna Group, the Pew Research Center, Gallup polls, they'll ask Americans today, man, how do you affiliate in terms of your religious beliefs? And more people are checking a box that they have not checked before. Now, somewhere around 3 out of 10 Americans are checking a box that reads none. It's their way of saying, I no longer affiliate with religion of any kind. Now, I told you guys last week that doesn't really bother me because I'm not really concerned with whether or not you affiliate with religion. But I am very concerned with whether or not you affiliate with Jesus. So you may not know this, but Jesus had some pretty serious concerns and some pretty serious conflicts with the religious leaders of his day. Jesus did not like religion. Over and over again, Jesus talked about the problems of religion, and Jesus got into confrontation with those who were the religious leaders of the establishment in his day. And yet, one of the things that I love about Jesus, one of the things that I really admire about Jesus, is that Jesus showed us how to walk away from religion without walking away from God in the process. See, Jesus understood that people may be fed up with religion. People may be sick and tired of what they've experienced when they have encounters with religious leaders. That they may be ready to walk away from that. But in the process, what they do not want to do is they do not want to walk away from God, because Jesus knew that God has some things to offer our world that our world desperately needs. Now, last week, I showed you one of those things. I showed you how when Jesus came into the world, he brought light into a world that was dark. And we talked all last week about how important that is for humanity. But I need you to know today, that is not the only thing that Jesus brought into the world when he came. Jesus knew that there's a lot of things that humanity needs, and unless God steps onto the earth, unless God becomes a part of their world and brings some things to them, they'll never have everything they need. A couple of weeks ago now, I finished reading a book by a guy named Erwin McManus. The title of the book is actually called The Genius of Jesus. This is a book that I highly recommend. Now, some of you don't like books with really long chapters, and so here's your public service announcement. Like, it has really long chapters, okay? But the content in every one of those chapters is absolutely incredible. You'll want to check it out if you have some time. In the opening chapter of this book, Erwin McManus argues that a genius is someone who shows us how to do something better than anyone has ever imagined. Okay, so if you were to Google geniuses throughout the history of the world, you'll see a lot of names on the list, okay? This is not just about high IQ. This is about people who have shown the rest of humanity how to do something better than anyone else has ever been able to do it before. So by that definition, Beethoven was a genius because he showed us a better way to make music. Likewise, Michelangelo was a genius because he showed us a better way to make art. Guys like Jack Welch, Warren Buffett, in their own right, they are geniuses because they have shown the rest of us a better way to run a business or to run a company. And if you think about it, it really is the true mark of a genius. And it's also what made Jesus a genius. While some people are showing us better ways to make music or to make art, while other people are showing us the better way to lead a team meeting or to run a company, Jesus steps onto the scene and Jesus shows us a better way to be human. In fact, I think that's something that we can all agree on today, that Jesus really did show us a far better way to be human. I've known a lot of atheists and skeptics over the course of my life and had a lot of conversations with them. I've known people who were skeptical of Christianity and even critical of Christianity. And if that's you, what I believe to be true about you is what I found to be true in all of the other conversations that I've had. People who don't believe in God, they still believe that Jesus really did show us a better way to be human. This is why so many Christian leaders are trying to drive into their congregations this mindset. This is the language that so many are using today. They say things like this: following Jesus makes life better, and following Jesus makes us better at life. In fact, these are not just ideas that I want you to learn today. These are ideas that I want you to hold on to as we study the person of Jesus together, as we look at the Gospel of John. Over and over again, what you will discover is that Jesus really did show us a better way to be human. You'll discover and you'll see for yourself that following Jesus really does make life better, and following Jesus makes us far better at life. And today what you're going to see is this powerful reminder that yes, you may not need religion, but this right here is why you still need God in your life. I want you to look at the passage with me today in the Gospel of John, chapter 1, verses 14 through 18, as we look at something else that Jesus brought into our world. John continues his writing and he says this: "The Word became flesh, and he made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father, full of grace and truth." John, not John who's writing this book, but John the Baptist that we talked about last week, John testified concerning him. He cried out saying, "This is the one I spoke about when I said, 'He who comes after me has actually surpassed me because he was before me.' Out of his fullness, we have all received grace in place of grace already given. For the law was given through Moses, grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God but the one and only Son, who is himself God and is in closest relationship with the Father. He has made him known." Now, you read that passage, and one thing is really, really clear at the end. It's really clear that Jesus didn't just know God, and Jesus didn't just know a lot about God. According to verse 18, Jesus himself was God. And the reason that John comes back and makes this point again at this point in the very first chapter is because he knows that there are a lot of people who will go through life and they will be done with religion, but he doesn't want you to be done with God. You may be fed up with religion, and while you may be ready to walk away from religion, you do not want to walk away from Jesus. There are things about Jesus that we all need in our lives. See, God knows that people are not looking for a bunch of rules to follow. They're looking for an example to follow. And so what Jesus does is he is the Word, and the Word became flesh, and he made his dwelling among us. Now, that's a weird description. Why in the world would John describe Jesus as the Word? The reason that he does that is because he wants you to understand that Jesus is the physical expression of everything that God wants to tell us. When Jesus became a man and that Word became flesh, it's not like Jesus was becoming a movie that you could watch for a few hours. Jesus became a man that you could watch for many years over the course of his life. Again, God knows that people aren't looking for a bunch of rules to follow. That's religion. But what we are looking for is we're looking for an example to follow. And that is why the Word became flesh and he made his dwelling among us. Jesus wanted to come and be the example that we could all follow. Jesus wanted to come into the world so that you would see crystal clearly how to have a relationship with God the Father. Jesus wanted to show us how to have relationships with other people. Jesus wanted to show us a far better way to be human. Now, if you go back to the beginning of this passage, around verse 14 and 15, John says that he and his friends have seen something that most people have never seen. He says, "We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son." Now, that word glory is a little bit of a churchy term. It's not a word that you use in your everyday life when you're out there going to school or when you're going to work. So I want to take some time. I want to make sure you understand this. In our culture and in our context, glory or to glorify something means that John and his friends, they could see qualities in Jesus that made him better than any other man they had ever known. They could see qualities in Jesus that made him worthy of honor and praise. Now, think about it in our context and in our culture. A lot of us in our culture, we glorify things like athletes, right? So the NFL playoffs are underway. They started yesterday. If you were to tune into sports radio or watch ESPN or listen to analysts right before the game, what do? They glorify quarterbacks like Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers and Patrick Mahomes, and they glorify them. And what they do is they talk about the unique qualities that make them superior to every other quarterback in the league. So what they do is they glorify that athlete and they say, there's something about this athlete, there's something about these quarterbacks that make them far better than any other quarterback in the league. So when John is writing and he says, we have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, he's saying we have seen qualities in Jesus that don't just make him a better carpenter than any other carpenter. It's not that. It's that they see qualities in Jesus that make him a far better human than any other human who has ever lived. In part because Jesus was God. He's God who became a human to show us all a far better way to be human. And so the question is, well, what are the qualities that they saw in Jesus that made him so unique? Didn't just make him different, made him better than every other man who had ever walked the earth. What are the qualities that they saw in Jesus that made him worthy of honor and praise? Now, to be fair to Jesus, there were a lot of qualities that they saw in Jesus that made him a standout among all other humans who have ever walked on the earth. But what John does right here is he highlights two in particular. He hits it in verse 14, and then he turns around and he hits it again in verse 17. And the reason that he does that is because back in his day, they didn't have the function where you could just hit bold or underline or italics. So what they would do to emphasize something is they would repeat it. And so he does that. He hits it in 14. He highlights it again in verse 17. And in both of these verses, John makes the point that Jesus was full of both grace and he was also at the exact same time full of truth. Now, these are qualities that people simply do not possess together in the same human being, okay? It's like saying, man, I want to eat food that tastes good, and at the exact same time, I want that food to be good for me. Right? You hear that and you think, well, dude, you're going to have to choose, like, which one do you want? Because if you want food that tastes good, then we're going to order some pizza and some wings and some nachos, and we're going to go get some Bluebell ice cream. And we're going to make some milkshakes and eat Oreos. But if you want food that is good for you, we're going to have to come up with a completely different menu. Why? Because this idea that you could have both in the exact same meal, it feels like that is a really, really hard thing to find. And the same is true with humanity when it comes to the qualities of both grace and truth. You'll run into people in the world who are gracious people and they're ready to forgive and extend grace. And you will run into other people in the world who are quick to tell you the truth. They want to know where you messed up, and they want to be able to point that out so that you don't make those same mistakes again. But it is really, really rare to find both of these qualities in the exact same person. And the reason that it's rare is because it feels like these qualities completely contradict one another. Now, Andy Stanley has done a great job of kind of highlighting the differences between grace and truth. And so he kind of says it like this. He would say that truth says you're accountable for what you've done. But grace comes along and grace says you have been forgiven for what you have done. Those feel like two totally different things. I hear that and I think, okay, well, which one is it? Am I forgiven or am I accountable? But it doesn't feel like you could have both in the exact same person, right? He would say that truth says, I'm disappointed in you. But then grace comes along and grace says, man, I love you. You hear that and you think, well, which one is it? Like, are you mad at me or do you love me right now? Because I'm confused. Truth comes along and truth says, man, you've got some work to do. You can't live your life like this. Then grace comes along and grace says, man, no matter what you do, I'm always going to be here for you. I always love you. Do you feel the tension between the two? Because most of us, we would look at that and we would go, man, it's got to be one or the other. It can't be both. And that's probably true until Jesus came into the world. And when Jesus came into the world, Jesus said, I'm going to show you a new way. I'm going to show you a far better way to be human. And so John, the guy who's writing all of this down, he watched Jesus for like 3 years of his life. As he looked at Jesus, he saw Jesus interacting with all kinds of people. He saw Jesus interacting with religious leaders. He saw him interacting with guys like Nicodemus, who came to him in the middle of the night to ask questions about religious stuff and God and how do you have a relationship with him. He had conversations with a woman who had been caught in adultery. John watched the way in which Jesus interacted with guys like tax collectors and sinners. He watched the way in which Jesus would interact with other guys like fishermen and blue-collar guys. And in all of those interactions, John was absolutely blown away at the way in which Jesus treated other people. Because in Jesus, he saw a man who perfectly embodied both grace and truth to the fullest extent at the exact same time. It wasn't a little bit of both. He was full of both. Jesus, while he was on the earth, he was never lacking in grace. While Jesus was on the earth, he was never lacking in truth. If grace needed to be given, he gave all the grace that was required. If the truth needed to be told, he didn't pull any punches. He went the last 10% with people, and he communicated the truth in the fullest extent. Now, let's just be honest. As we think about our own lives, you may lean in one direction or the other, but you're not full of grace or full of truth, right? So you may lean in the direction of grace, but you give grace sometimes, and there are other times when you don't give grace. You may lean in the direction of truth, but there are times when you tell people the truth, and there are other times when you sit silently on the truth. Not Jesus. Jesus was absolutely full of both grace and truth. And so I want to know about you, just kind of out of curiosity for my own self, and I think you probably need to know for the sake of self-awareness, which way do you lean? I want everybody to participate. How many of you would say, man, in my dealings with other people, I lean in the direction of giving grace to people? Let me see all of your hands. Okay, you people are considered the nice people in the crowd, okay? Now, all the rest of us, if you're a truth teller, let me see your hands. You people are jerks, okay? I'm in that camp, okay? So, like, this is self-indicting on me, okay? Like, this creates tension, right? Now, I want to point something out to you, okay? For all of us, we need to see this. The reason that some of you extend grace is because you want the relationship to be okay. Okay? And the reason that some of you tell the truth is because you want the person to be okay, right? Now, both of these are admirable qualities, but both of these are absolutely necessary. And this is why Jesus came into the world and he was full to the brim of both grace and truth. If you were to ask Jesus, which one is more important to you, fixing the relationship or fixing the person? You know what Jesus would say? Yes. He would not choose between the two. He would never fix the relationship at the expense of the person. And he would never fix the person at the expense of the relationship. It was not one or the other for Jesus. It was always both and. See, Jesus knew that there's problems that surface when you give people grace and you withhold the truth. And there's problems when you tell the truth and you withhold grace. The problem with extending grace and withholding the truth is that it causes people to live their whole life in a cycle of dysfunction. Think about this, okay? So somebody calls you, and maybe it's one of your kids, or maybe it's a close friend, and they have blown it. They've made a tragic mistake in your life. And so they call you and they say, man, I'm in a tight spot. I made a big mistake. I need you to come over. I need you to help me with this. And you roll up on the scene. And if you give grace and you don't share the truth, then what happens is you give them grace, you bail them out, you help them clean up the mess that they've created, you assure them that all has been forgiven and that everything's going to be okay, and then they turn around and a couple of weeks or maybe a couple of months later, they do it all over again. Why? Because you gave them grace, but you never told them the truth. You never told them the truth that you need to change. You never told them the truth. You actually have to change. You never told them the truth about how they could change. So they spend their whole life stuck in a rut. Now, on the other side of that exact same coin is a completely different problem. The problem with sharing the truth and never extending grace is that people live their whole life in a constant beatdown, right? So if you had a parent, probably a dad, who was a total truth teller, man, you felt like he was always riding your butt. You felt like he was always on your case. And that right there, it creates this feeling in us, a feeling defeated. It's really easy for us to get discouraged. You probably go through life and you feel like you are a royal disappointment. In fact, this right here is why so many people are leaving legalistic churches that are really heavy on truth, and they never give anybody any grace. They're always dropping truth bombs on you, but they're never reminding you of what God's grace really looks like in a practical way. And let me tell you something. This is not just a problem that you see in churches. This is a real problem that you see in our culture today. How many of you have heard of cancel culture? Let me see your hands, okay? Most of us have heard of cancel culture. Why are people getting canceled? Because people in our society operate from a new position. If I don't agree with you, then I am done with you. I have no grace for you. And that right there will destroy relationships. That right there will destroy people. That right there will destroy any sense of community. That right there destroys the possibility that people will ever truly change. Because if that's the way you treat people, they look at you like you're the problem, and you're looking at them like they're the problem, and there is an ever-growing chasm between people in this country. And Jesus knew it. Jesus knew this is no way to be human. And that's why when Jesus stepped onto the earth, he said, I'm going to take something as God. I'm going to take something to that world that this world desperately needs. I'm going to take something to humanity that they have not been able to figure out on their own. And so when he came, he said, I'm going to be full of both grace and truth, because that creates the ideal environment for authentic relationships to be established and for people to be able to grow. Listen, it's what I need in my life. It's what you need in your life. It's what our world needs right here and right now. I've got a friend of mine who comes to our church. His name is Graham. A lot of you know Graham. Graham actually played an awesome violin solo in our Christmas Eve service. Anybody remember that? That thing was off the chain, man. It was unbelievable. Graham is a very talented guy. But over the course of his life, Graham's hit some bumps in the road, like every single one of us. But one of the things that Graham has learned is that in order to overcome the bumps in the road and the setbacks in life, you need people in your life who will extend to you both grace and truth. It's the only hope for real relationship, and it's the only hope for real change. I want you to hear it from him himself as you check out his story.
Well, hello, everybody. My name's Graham Ray. I am a professional musician, and I have been for the last 20 years. That's all I've done for a living. I've absolutely fell in love with being a musician and that whole idea of being a rock star, making it big or making it famous. I wanted that. I craved it, and it didn't take long. But when I was 15 years old, we had a band together and started doing some gigs. I had some older guys in the band. We were able to do these little open mic nights, and some of them were like bar restaurants, So at 15, you're already around some things and some influences that it didn't take long. That definitely, the drinking age was 18 at the time too in Louisiana. So when I started hitting the bars, I started drinking. I met my wife along the way, Jamie. I don't know, for the first time in my life, I was like, I really like this girl because she's a good girl, A few years later, Jamie and I got married in 2005. We ended up having our son in April of 2007. And that was kind of the big wake up. Well, I thought it was the big wake up call. I ended up getting my first arrest in 2007. You think that would have been enough to change what was going on with me, because I had a son, I had a baby. I ended up getting a second DUI in 2009. And I was like, this is getting pretty serious. A third is a felony offense. I didn't get arrested for the next 9 years, but I got pulled over a few times and talked my way out of it. I was still drinking, but I was also struggling with trying to be a better person and trying to be more responsible with it, control it, I guess. So in 2016, I got off the road. I left the Mulligan Brothers to be with my wife and son more, with Jamie and Lennon. I was a little depressed about not touring, but I was excited about being home with my family, but that was just my emotions kind of playing with me. So January of 2017, pretty early on in the year, I got my third DUI. It wasn't even 6 weeks and I got a fourth DUI. That was a pretty serious wake-up call, so I thought. 2019 rolls around and I went to play for the Ocean Springs Education Foundation. I don't remember tearing down my gear. I don't remember loading my vehicle, and I don't remember getting behind the wheel. And I came off and I rear-ended this truck. Nobody was in it, but I totaled my vehicle. This was my felony third offense, but it's technically my fifth DUI. This was my rock bottom right here. I was facing a felony offense. 3 nights in the Jackson County Adult Detention Center, Very, very sobering experience right there. Chaplain comes in and he's like, who's Graham Ray? So I'm like, me, that's me. He's like, you got a lot of people praying for you, son. I said, well, thank you very much. He's like, you ever heard of a place called the Home of Grace? And I was like, I actually have, yes, sir. And I said, I think I'm gonna go there when I get out of here. I ended up getting out, and my wife and son, she brought my son to pick me up. And and I just broke down, man. I cried, and I said, I want to go to the Home of Grace. I want to get help. And I ended up going to the Home of Grace in Van Cleef, a 90-day addiction, faith-based addiction recovery program. This was a moment for me. If you were ever going to pick a moment and say, this is the moment I was saved, that I really felt connected to the Word. I finally felt this emotional connection to Jesus. And I graduated on January 10th of 2020. And man, that was a wonderful day to get to come home to my family. And God's grace is the ultimate grace. God does grant us grace, and there is a way out. The truth is the word is real. God is real. If I stay true to staying in the Word and just trying to live that better life, my life is automatically better, man. We may think that we don't need God, or we're in a situation where, my life is good. I'm making money. I've got a great job. I've got this awesome family. I didn't think I needed God. If you're out there and you're struggling with some things and you think you can do it on your own, you can't. It's okay to give it all to God and let His grace come in and change you. If you're questioning, do you need God? Yes, you do. And that's okay, man, because you got other people in your corner. I promise you. If there was ever a time where we felt like we needed Him more than ever, it's right now, man. Right now.
Man, I love that. I love the fact that He's willing to share the painful parts of His life so that you and I can learn a real life lesson that we need both grace and truth. For years, Graham got a lot of grace from a lot of people. But it wasn't until he spent 90 days in the Home of Grace where he was being told truth every single day, being inundated with the truth that you need to change, being inundated with the truth about how to change, that the cycle of dysfunction was finally broken and he was set free from this addiction. That's what we all need in our life. And I would just point out to you that if you're a teenager, got a lot of teenagers in the room today, that journey for him started all the way back when he was only 15 years old. A lot of teenagers are walking around right now not realizing how the decisions that they're making today can still be affecting their lives 10 or even 20 years from now. I love you enough, teenagers, to tell you the truth that the decisions that you're making will have a big impact on your life somewhere down the road. And it's why I unashamedly call you to follow Jesus Christ, because He has grace for all your mistakes and all your mess ups, but He's also going to inundate you with the truth so that your life can change and so that you can be more and more like Him. As we think about these two qualities that we see uniquely in Jesus, I want to remind you of this truth. It's a truth that you hear a lot in Christian circles today. They say it like this: it's okay to not be okay, but it's not okay for you to stay that way. In fact, I want you to say that with me. Will you do that? Let's say it together. It's okay to not be okay, but it's not okay for you to stay that way. Listen, it really is okay for you to not be okay and to even admit that to God, because God is gracious. But it's not okay for you to stay that way. In fact, I would say it's not even okay for you to say that you are okay, because that's not true. All of us are broken in some form or fashion, and we all need God in our lives. And so if you're here today, I just want to remind you that you can never have healthy relationships with other people until you first have a healthy relationship with God. What we learn from Jesus today is that your relationships need a whole lot more than just love if they're going to be healthy. What relationships require are also grace and truth. And so I want you to think about your own relationship with God for just a moment. And I want to ask you a question as we close. Have you ever asked God to extend to you His grace? I want to remind you of what grace says. God's grace says, I love you, I forgive you, and no matter what, I am always here for you. You and I instinctively know we need other people to tell us that all the time. But if we need other people to tell us that, then I promise you this, we need God to tell us that as well. We need his grace. And this is why John said, as a follower of Jesus in this passage, out of his fullness, we have received grace in the place of grace already given. That's who God is. That's why Jesus came. He wants you to know it doesn't matter how many times you've blown it. He's not running short on grace. He's not running out of grace. He has grace that is overflowing. He has a fullness of grace that he can give to you in place of grace already given. It is a never-ending grace that secures you eternally in a relationship with the Heavenly Father. If you've never asked God for his grace, that's where the relationship with God starts for every single one of us. Would you pray with me? As we enter into a time and a spirit of prayer, I want to ask you to be really, really honest with God. I don't know where you are in your faith journey. I'm sure a lot of people are coming to this series and watching online because they have questions and they have real doubts. If that's you, I'm not saying that you know everything that you need to know, but I want to ask you this. Do you know enough to know that you need his grace? If you know enough to know that you need his grace, would you just ask him for it right where you sit? Doesn't matter if you're sitting in the auditorium or if you're sitting at home watching online. God is with you. God can hear you. Would you just cry out to him right where you are and say, God, I need your grace in my life. I need your grace to fix my relationship with you. I need your grace to forgive all the wrong that I've done. God, without your grace, I'm in trouble. If that's a simple prayer that you prayed, man, I want you to know there's nothing powerful about those words, but there is something very powerful about the intentions of your heart. There's something very powerful about this thing called faith. It brings us into a relationship with God where his grace screams at you for the rest of your life. I love you. I do forgive you. No matter what, I'm always here for you. And so if that's a prayer that you prayed, I want you to let me know as your pastor. I'm not going to ask you to come to the front of the church. I'm not going to ask you to stand up in front of everybody. I'm not going to ask you to do anything that would embarrass you. But I would ask that you fill out the Connect card that's in that seat pocket in front of you. You can just take a minute and fill it out while the rest of us continue in a spirit of prayer. And at the bottom of that card, you can check a box that says, today I put my faith in Jesus. If you want information about baptism, man, I want you to check that box. It's a way in which you go public with your faith in Jesus. And you say to this church family, I want everybody to know that Jesus has forgiven me, that Jesus has washed me clean, that Jesus has forgiven my mistakes because he's given me his grace. If you fill out that card while the rest of us pray and just kind of work through some things ourselves, you can then drop it in the black boxes that are mounted by the exits as you make your way out of the auditorium, or you can always drop it off at the Connect desk as well out in the lobby. While you fill that out, I want the rest of us to just continue to reflect on what God has said to us today. We don't just need grace to fix the relationship. All of us need God's truth to fix us. Remember, truth says you're accountable. Truth says you can't keep living like this. And yet that's what a lot of us needed to hear today. We've been living in that cycle of mistakes just like Graham was. If that's you, I want to ask you, would you be willing to make a commitment today? Would you commit to either joining a community group with a small group of other people where you can study the teachings of Jesus and where you can search out the truth that Jesus came to give us? Or would you be willing to come back to Mosaic week after week, not just for this series, but for our entire study of the Gospel of John, where we'll spend the bulk of this year just searching after Jesus and searching after the truth that he came to give? That's something that God's impressing on you today, man. Would you just make a commitment to him right here, right now, just between you and God? Would you be willing to say, God, I'm going to search after Jesus and search after truth? God, I thank you so much for Jesus. And Jesus, I thank you for being full of both grace and truth. I want to thank you for being everything that we need, never lacking in one or the other. Thank you for loving us enough to fix the relationship, and thank you for loving us enough to give us a truth that would fix us. God, I ask that you would continue to do your great work in our lives, not just in this place, but even after we leave this place. I pray it all in Jesus' name. Amen.